Good. Good. All right, so a little trivia for everyone to start here. Does anybody out there know where the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover, came from? Nobody? You're not alone, because I looked around and I found several different answers, but I'm going with this one. It was first recorded in June 1867 in the newspaper Pica Democrat with the phrase, don't judge a book by its cover, see a man by his cloth, as there is often a good deal of solid wrath and superior skill underneath a jacket and yellow pants. And then a phrase was apparently more popularized by a show that I've never heard of called Glass Room by Lester Fuller, where they said you can never tell a book by its cover. So here's the deal. In a book, when you publish it, it's tough. You want that cover to look nice, right? Because there's so much inside of that book. But in reality, if we think about it, if you look at it and it looks boring, there's not a picture on there, or whatever it may be, we may never pick that book up. So we never get to the content that's inside of it. And that's this phrase, don't judge a book by its cover. And judgment is a tricky thing, right? To judge or not to judge, that's the question, right? Judgment. It's probably the number one theme that drive people away from the church in one sense, right? If you ask them why they don't come to church, what's their experience? You Christians, you're just going to judge. You're too judgy, you name it, and they want to judge. So here's what I want to ask you. And the argument these people use is that, Jesus said, do not judge or you will be judged. But here's the thing. You take it out of context, and there's far more to it, right? So there's a time and a place where, yes, we shouldn't be judging, but there's also a time and a place where we need to stand up and make a judgment call. So knowing that, judgment's a tricky thing, right? So could you imagine, on this side of the spectrum, that if no teacher had the right to judge or grade a performance or an essay, how would that go? Probably not very good, right? So no citizen could sit on a jury or hold a criminal accountable. Could you imagine? I mean, we're kind of seeing how that's going right now. Police officers had no rights to tell you you're on the wrong side of things. Those are examples where judgment's needed, right? That's clear. Now, what if someone next to you has funny hair? What do you tell them then? Do you come on and tell them they've got funny hair? Or do you just sit back and think to yourself, man, that person's got great funny hair? What if someone listens to loud music and something that you don't like? Do you automatically judge that person and say, they're listening to that gangster rap stuff and they've got to be doing this, that, and the other thing? Now, what if, here's a good one, you got someone that comes to church and they're covered in tattoos. Do we judge them and say, oh man, those hipsters? Or do we listen to what they've got to say? Now, what if you see a coworker who's getting a little too flirty with someone you know they're married? Do we judge them? What do we do? It's something Paul talks about a little bit deeper here in Romans chapter 2, verses 1 through 11. And if you remember, he was writing a letter kind of preparing himself to go visit these guys and be like, look at this is what's going on. So he says, you therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For whatever point you judge another, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do not do the same things. Now, I'll turn it up really loud. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere human being, pass judgment on them and yet do the same things, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness is intended to lead you to repentance? But because of your stubbornness and your unrepentant heart, you're storing up wrath against yourself for the day of God's wrath. When his righteous judgment will be revealed, God will repay each person accordingly to what they have done. To those who, by persistence in doing good, seek glory, honor, and immortality, he will give eternal life. But for those who are self-seeking and who reject the truths and follow evil, there will be wrath and judgment and anger. You can actually read the screen tonight? Yes! There will be trouble and distress for every human being who does evil, first the Jew, then the Gentile. But glory, honor, and peace for everyone who does good. First for the Jew, then for the Gentile. For God does not show favoritism. So here's what's clear, right? There's a time and a place for judgment. But the Bible gives some clear examples about, I'm trying to put this down, about favoritism, about judgment, and when you should do it, when you shouldn't do it, what you should be focused on, and whatnot. So the first thing that I want to take out of this is we should never judge superficially. Never judge superficially, right? Just like the theme, never judge a book by its cover. In John 7:24, it says, stop judging by mere appearances, but instead judge correctly. So I wonder how many is out there are guilty. I'm guilty as charged of the same thing, judging superficially, right? It's something that we all do. Someone's pretty, they've got to be stuck up. This person's wearing glasses, they've got to be a nerd. This person's got, the tattoos, they've got to be just a punk rocker. The list really goes on. And we in our head have this superficial judgment, and we never get to the surface of anything that's going on. So we've already made this superficial judgment that this guy's homeless, so he must have done something about on drugs. We shouldn't help him. We shouldn't do this. It's a superficial judgment that we've made without ever actually having a conversation with that person. And I heard this story, and I thought it was one of the most powerful examples of superficial judgment. There was a father whose son was in a bad accident, right? So he rushes him to the hospital, and he's sitting there, and he's waiting for a doctor to show up. And sprinting through that hospital comes this other doctor in his street clothes, and he's running just as fast as he possibly can to go help this kid out. And then the dad of the child who's currently injured is yelling at the doctor, why didn't you get here quicker? You need to help fix my son. What took you so long? Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for so long. I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for that. You're just wearing your street clothes. What's going on? And then the guy looked at him and he said, listen, sir, I'm doing absolutely everything that I can. I want nothing more than to help fix your child. Long story short, this doctor did heal that child, right? He did everything he needed to do, and he performed the surgery or whatever it may be. And the dad of the son who was saved asked the nurse, why was this doctor in such a hurry? What had happened was that doctor's son had died just a couple of days before. He was actually at his calling or at the wake for his son and got this emergency beep saying, you need to get here and perform the surgery. So this father here is superficially saying this doctor doesn't care, he's in a hurry, he wants to do this, he wants to do that, not knowing a single thing as to what was going on with this person. And I think that if we all are on that category, we just want to say, these kids are crazy, this is wild, that's going on, so automatically judge, say someone's a bad parent, or someone's this, or someone's that, without realizing it might be a long day. This might be their wild time, whatever it is. The key point being, don't judge superficially. Here's the main point before I get to point 2, is if we find ourselves angry about someone or something, check your approach. Right? Check your approach, because there's a time and a place to speak out against sin, but we've got to do it from a place of humility. There's a time and a place, we've got to do it from a place of humility. Which brings me to point number 2, which was actually also brought up in Romans 2:1. Never judge hypocritically. Never judge hypocritically. When we point out sin of others, but then we're doing the same thing, right? How's that look? We're so quick to sit there and say, you did wrong, you did wrong, you did wrong, you did wrong, but then we're the ones that are off doing the exact same thing. And we're saying that you should love one another, and we should do this, and we should do that, but then we're off bad-mouthing this person or that person, whatever it may be. Never judge hypocritically. So, and here's what I want to just kind of picture this, as Paul's kind of reading out this letter, they're reading it, in church, and he says to them, don't condemn other people. And these guys are probably up there screaming in the front row, amen, pastor, amen, you preach it. And then when Paul points out, no, I'm talking to you guys, right? You guys are the hypocrites too. Don't be judging other people. And then you watch them as they're all proud and everything, and just watch them kind of shrink down in their seat. Because it's a simple point, is we've all been there, we've all done it, but it's realizing it. That's when you're going to be able to make that change. Right? We're so fast to judge other people about things, but we've all got our own stuff that we've got to take care of. right? And I think about the story in the Gospel of John where the woman had committed adultery, and there was a group of men that were so quick to want to stone her to death, right? You're a sinner, you did this, you've done that, you've done that, you've done that. And then Jesus comes and says, you who have not sinned, go ahead and throw that first stone. You who didn't sin, you throw that first stone. Because the point of that being is, we got to not be so quick to judge, because we've all been there, we've all done that, we've all made mistakes, right? Learn the approach to deal with it. Throwing a rock at somebody and calling them every name under the sun, that's not the way to go about it. Craig Rochelle said this. He said, your harshest judgments often reveal your deepest weakness. So your harshest judgment for someone else often reveals the deepest weakness that you yourself have. And I want you to think about that for a second, because that one kind of hit. That was weird. That one kind of hit home for me. This idea of, if we're judging someone for something, maybe it's because this person's got this, but there's something inside of us that we want a little bit of what that person has, whatever it is. So I challenge you just to think about that, because often the sin that we notice in others is the one that's starting to take the deepest roots in ourselves. Right? The sin that we notice in other people so much is often the sin that's taking the deepest root in us. So if we notice someone that's always flirting, they're always doing this, where does that affect us? Right? Is there something, do we have some form of envy? Do we have some form of, there's something going on with our spouse that shouldn't be there? If we notice someone that's always got nice things and we want to point out, oh, they're stupid for spending their money on that, do we have an issue that we need to take care of that way? So kind of check yourself when it comes to that, right? So it's kind of this idea of what we should do is we should kind of self-evaluate. And it's difficult to do, but if we find ourselves constantly judging other people, just on the regular, like, oh man, I can't believe they're doing that, I can't believe they're doing that. Take a step back, self-evaluate, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? So it kind of goes back to previous messages where we've talked about having people around you, because they might be able to step up and say, Trav, you're talking an awful lot of crap today. What's going on? What's going on? Don't judge hypocritically. Take a step back. Self-evaluate if you find yourself constantly doing that. This next point, never hold non-Christians to Christian standards. And that's a little bit tough to think about on the surface of things. Never hold non-Christians to Christian standards. In 1 Corinthians 5:12, it says, what business is it of mine to judge those outside of the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those on the outside. So John Maxwell said it best this way. He said, every day it's my goal to speak value in people's lives. Every day it's my goal to speak value in people's lives. So when you hear people, when we see things like, hey, you non-Christian, you're not acting like a Christian. Exactly, because where do they need to see it from? If they're not seeing us living it, they're not going to know what a Christian lives like. So how can we judge them for not being a Christian if you reflect in the mirror, what are they seeing? Right? It's our goal to speak value into people's lives. Because when someone's not a Jesus follower, here's the thing, they're not going to hold the same Christian standards that we hold to. Our goal should be to get them to want to hold those same standards that we do. Our goal is not to point out the sin, not to change them, but to introduce them to a God who will. All right? Our goal is to not point out the sin, not for us personally to change them, but for us to live our lives to introduce them to a God who will. We need to love them, not correct them. We need to love them and not correct them. And there's a story here about Jane Roe, the famous girl in the abortion case of Roe versus Wade, right? So she was a young girl in need of money when everything went down. And she said, when the case was over, and they won, the big victory that gave abortion rights, she said that she felt that those that pushed her to file this case against the Supreme Court were just using her, right? She just said after the case was done, she thought she'd feel all high and mighty, and instead she felt lonely and low because she has one side of the aisle telling her how wrong she is, another side of people where she thought, they were her friends are ignoring her. And she got to this state of depression. But then something changed in her. The year 1995, a pro-life organization called Operation Rescue moved in the next door to the Dallas abortion clinic where she was still working at. It was there she met the leader of that rescue mission, Reverend Flip Benham. And she said in her book, she said, I called him Flip Benham, as in Venom, she remembers, and he called me responsible for the deaths of 35 million. So then she said, occasionally their clashes in the parking lot would collapse into conversation. During friendly banter, Normal, that's her actual first name, goaded Flip, what you need to do is go to a good Beach Boys concert. And Flip answered, Miss Normal, I haven't been to a Beach Boy concert since 1976. And that seemingly, this is what she writes, that seemingly inconspicuous response shook me to the core. All at once, Flip became human to me, and she saw him in a new light. So she continued teasing him. Come on, Flip, I didn't know you were ever a sinner. And here's what I want you to catch. That one response by Flip, that one little, instead of suddenly saying, this is what you're responsible for doing, because don't get me wrong, abortion is a sin, and what she was doing was wrong. But she went from being judged this way to, I'm going to see you as a human being, and, casual conversations led, and then this girl became a follower of Jesus. It didn't happen by judging her non-Christian past. That's not how that occurred. That's not how she found Jesus. It happened by having that relationship, by seeing you as a human being, and by explaining who Jesus is, so that way you want to follow God and change your life. Right? So, is it hard to not hold non-Christians to Christian standards? Absolutely, because we all want people to kind of be like us in that respect. But that's not how we're going to get to our point of making disciples and changing the world. It's just not going to occur that way. Hang on a second. 2 more points. We need to make sure that we always help other believers who have fallen be restored. Always help other believers who have fallen be restored. So it goes back to that do not judge thing, right? So we've got a believer in Galatians 6, 1 through 2. It says, brothers and sisters, if someone's caught in sin, who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourself, or you may also be tempted. Carry each other's burdens in this way, and you will fulfill the law of Christ. Right? We want to restore that person gently. So that most important aspect, to be able to restore someone gently instead of kicking them down when they're down, is going back to this idea we've talked about again, of having a relationship with people. So you can come up to them and be like, dude, what are you doing? What's going on here? We need to help you with this, rather than being like, oh man, yeah, you did that. That's terrible. You are a god-awful human being, and maybe you should, and you can go down this negative road of do this, do that, whatever it is. And you need to make sure, though, that we're not kicking them when they're down, because chances are people already know that they messed up, right? There's a very good chance that when they're down low, these guys already know they screwed somewhere up. So we need to make sure that we're not kicking them down further. We're building them up. We're saying, hey, I noticed you were slipping here. What can we do to help you? I noticed that, you've been really depressed lately. What's going on? What can I pray for you about? Not, oh yeah, you did make a bunch of stupid decisions, huh? Good luck. Good luck. That's not what the church is about. We need to make sure that we don't kick someone when they're down. Right? So, if we do need to speak truth to someone because they're living in sin, what do we do and how do we do it? Right? We're finally to that point of we've really actually got to speak some truth into someone's life. How do we do it? What do? We talk about it with love. Right? We go at it from an approach of love. Because Jesus is love. So we want to make sure that we're making sure our approach when we're confronting somebody, if we need to, is with grace and truth. Not one or the other, but grace and truth. Because there's the blunt side of things where, again, if you come out and you just tell someone exactly how it is, it's not necessarily going to be received very well. But if you come out and you first start with some grace, it's like giving constructive criticism. You start off by saying, hey, I noticed that you're doing this really, really well, and you excel here. They're more apt to hear what follows. But if you just come at them with, dude, this is terrible, that approach is not going to work when confronting someone with the sin that they're living. Because our ultimate goal is to get these people to understand their lives of sins and get them to commit their life to Jesus, right? So if we just go by this perspective of just all truth and no grace, it's not going to work out so well. But then if we go by this perspective, again, of just all grace, of like, you keep doing you do you know, you're looking at these websites all day long, absolutely, you do what makes you happy. You do this, you do that, you're spending all this money, keep on spending. You're having an affair, go ahead and you just, whatever makes you happy. If we're going at it with all grace and no truth, then we're not doing any favors to anybody either. So we need to combine it with grace and truth, right? Grace and truth will set people free. And lastly, I want to end with a little bit of encouragement, is that, you know, Jesus is the ultimate judge. So this is speaking to people who have been on the other end of haters, or who have doubters out there, you know, whatever it may be. Don't worry about it. Right? When you get those haters out there that are jealous, that they're being hypocrites, whatever it may be, you don't worry about what those haters have to say. We worry about Jesus. Because we need to make sure that we don't focus on what others think of you and instead focus on what is true of you. Right? Because this world is so quick to beat you down. We're so quick to judge, and we're so quick to slam people when they're down, that it takes someone that's way up here, you're running high, you want to brag to someone about how great you've been doing, and they just kick you, man, and then all of a sudden you go 10 feet lower. You make sure that you focus on what's true of you. Right? Because Craig Rochelle, again, he said this. He said, at the end of the day, we don't have to be approved by man if we're appointed by God. At the end of the day, we do not need to have the approval of man if we're appointed by God. And I want you all to remember that, because, again, there's people out here, you know, the amount of times that I see people that have rolled their eyes at me alone, just talking about a church perspective of, well, did he go to a school for this? Did he go to seminary? Did he do this? Did he do that? You know what? There's been days where it has beaten me down. It has been like, what do we do in this world? Why do we prepare sermons? Why do we do this? Why do we do that? But then the more I think about it, I know that God has called me to this position. So you know what? The heck with what anyone else says. It doesn't matter what a person says if you know that you're appointed by God to do it. And that's what I want to tell any of you. So, Brandon, you love to cook. Some people out there will say, Brandon, that's not a living. You can't do this. You can't do that. But you've said it millions of times. It brings a smile to your face seeing other people enjoy that food. That's part of your calling. Right? It doesn't matter what anyone else says about it if you know that's something that you're appointed by God to be doing. So that's what I want to encourage everybody out here with today, is that there's some mean, nasty people out there. And we've all been there to a point where we've judged somebody else where we shouldn't have. And we've all got a little bit of work to do. But we serve a God who's the ultimate judge, and that should be all that matters. Not what I think about you, not what anyone else thinks about you, but what Jesus does. So when you're feeling down, remember God's there. When someone tells you something that you don't like, or that's just clearly mean, remember Jesus is there. Trust God's plan, press on, do good for him, and lead others to Jesus. That's what we want to do at the end of the day, right? Lead others to Jesus. So make sure that as we're dead, if you can come kind of press the stop button, that if we need to get to a point of having a conversation with somebody, that our end result is to lead them to Christ, not to beat them